Students, in the previous video we completed the second part of the chapter 2, Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom, from first flight, class 10th English. Now today we'll start with part 3, and before going for the part 3, I'll start with the ending portion of part 2, so that we can link part 3 with 2nd. So in part 2, the ending point was according to Nelson Mandela, no one takes birth in this world hating one another according to their color, background, or race or religion. People must learn to hate. Now this is the contradictory statement of Nelson Mandela. He is saying that people must learn to hate. Now we may think that why he is saying that people must learn to hate one another. This is not a good thing. This is not a good quality. But why he is saying so? Because being a human being, everybody has a little part of hatred in his or her heart. It remains there. Now that depends on the person whether he uses that hatred or not. That depends on the person, but it remains there in the human heart. And why he is insisting on this thing? Because if they can learn to hate, they can learn to love even. So that's why Nelson Mandela is saying that person must learn to hate, because love comes naturally to the human heart. In the same way, hatred also comes naturally into the human heart. That's why he is insisting on learning the hatred for the human being. Now, even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, now Nelson Mandela is sharing his experiences when he, along with his comrades, was there in the prison, where he found a man who had a little kindness in his heart, and that was one of the guard of prison. So Nelson Mandela observed the glimpse of kindness into that guard's heart. Now, though he observed that kindness only for a little time, but still that kindness was there in that cruel fellow also. So that kindness kept Nelson Mandela going. Means that created a kind of hope into Nelson Mandela's heart. Now, the last thing what Nelson Mandela sees: man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. Now, this is very important thing to understand. Everybody in this world has goodness in his or her heart. The need is that some person keeps that goodness, that kindness hidden in their heart, and some persons expose that towards the people. So, but that flame remains there. That flame of goodness remains there in everybody's heart. Now, that is different thing whether it is hidden or whether it is exposed. So, this was the part of second part. Now, we'll go with the third one. In life, every man has twin obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, to community, to country. Now, each and everybody, not only in Africa only, everywhere in this world, everybody has two obligations along with him. One obligation towards his family, another one towards his nation. Towards his nation, his people, and one is for his family members, mother, father, daughter, wife. Now, so these two obligations everybody possesses. In a civil and human society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclination and abilities. In a human society, every person is able to keep or to fulfill all these two obligations according to his own inclination. Inclination means according to his own interest. Now that depends on the person whether he wants to give importance to obligation towards his family or to obligations to his nation. That depends on the person. And there are some fellows who can go with both the obligations. Now, but in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. Now Nelson Mandela is saying, and he is saying that for Nelson Mandela it was very difficult to keep or to fulfill both the obligations together. It was difficult for Nelson Mandela in Africa. Now we can understand why was it difficult for Nelson Mandela, because his country was undergoing slavery, Ghulam. Now, in South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. Why he was saying that for a person in South Africa it was difficult to fulfill both the obligations? Because in South Africa, a man of color means a man of dark complexion. For that person, it was difficult to keep his both the obligations, because it was difficult for that person to live his life as a human being. And if he tried, in those times, if any person tried to live his life as a human being, he was punished and isolated. Punished, you know very well, he was punished for attempting to live his life, and after that he was isolated also. He was separated from his family. Now, in South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home, and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. As I told you, if a person tried to serve towards his people, if a person tried to fulfill his obligations, so that person was ripped off from his family, that person was made apart from his family by the rulers or ruling government, and he had to live his life just like a rebellion, one who go against the system. So those people, they were against the system, contemporary system, but they were right at their position. African people were right at their position. Now, I did not in the beginning chose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. In the beginning, Nelson Mandela is saying that in the beginning, when he might be an adolescent, at that time he didn't put his people above his family. He didn't consider his people more important than his family. Means he considered his family more important, right? In the beginning, it was in the beginning. But when he started serving, when he started doing something for his people, for his comrades, for the citizen of his nation, then he found that something was preventing him from doing so. And what was that? His obligation towards his family. This thing was preventing him from fulfilling his obligation towards his fellow members, towards his people. Now, I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free in every way that I could know, free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. Now he is saying that when he was born, during that time or at that time, he didn't have the hunger for freedom. Because you know very well, when a child takes birth or when a child is born, at that time he doesn't need many things, or if he needs things, then not at that great level. So whatever things he needed, those were easily available. So that's why he could not realize that he was under slavery. Now, he was free because in his childhood he was free to run in the fields around his mother's hut. He was free to swim in the clear stream which ran through his village. He was free to roast mealies under the stars, and he was also free to ride on the back of slow moving bulls. And now he is saying that as long as he followed the instructions of his father, as long as he obeyed his father and he was abided by the customs of his tribe, till that time he was not troubled by any laws of man or God, because he was abided, he was following his father's instructions, he was following his tribe's instructions and rules. So he didn't feel that he was not free. Then what happened after that? It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me. Now, when did he know about the real meaning of freedom? When he grew up as a young man. Then he realized what freedom actually was. He thought about his childhood freedom that seemed to him as an illusion. Illusion means the thing which seemed to be real, but that is actually not real. So his childhood freedom was an illusion when he thought so, when he became a young man. Now, and then he realized that his freedom was already taken from him. Now, and then he began to feeling hungry for his freedom. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased and go where I chose. Now, as a student, he needed the freedom of moving out at night. He needed the freedom of reading what he liked. He needed the freedom of choosing where to go and where not to go. So these kind of freedoms he needed as a student. Now, but that is not freedom actually. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. Now, as he grew up and became a young man, then he required more things in his life, or he needed more things in his life, and then he yearned for means he longed for, he wished for freedom to achieve his basic potential, freedom to earn his livelihood, freedom to get married, and freedom to have a family. And he didn't think that this freedom was to be obstructed by any lawful life. Now, but then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were not free. Then he realized he was getting everything, but then he realized that his brothers and sisters, means the citizens of Africa, African people, they were not free. Then he realized that even when his people were not free, so he is not free even. He realized so. Now, I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. Now he saw that it was not only Nelson Mandela's freedom curtailed, but the people who looked like him, their freedom was also curtailed. Now what is curtailed? Curtailed means lessened, decreased or deducted. So there not only Mandela's freedom was deducted, but his fellow members, his people's freedom was also deducted. Means they were given freedom in certain areas only, not fully. Now, that is when I joined the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of my people. And that was the time when Nelson Mandela joined African National Congress, and that is when his hunger for freedom became greater, because he wanted freedom for his people. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove law-abiding attorney to a big criminal, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home. Now, he is saying that it was this desire, only this desire of getting freedom changed Nelson Mandela changed Nelson Mandela totally. Means this desire changed Nelson Mandela's personality, and he became a bold man, a brave man he was turned into a brave man from a frightened man. Now, this desire drove Nelson Mandela, who was a law-abiding attorney. Attorney means lawyer. So, Nelson Mandela was a lawyer, but this desire of getting freedom changed Nelson Mandela into a criminal. Now, actually he was not a criminal. Actually, he was fighting for his freedom. So, that's why for the ruling government, he became a criminal. Actually, he was not a criminal. Now, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home. And this desire changed Nelson Mandela from a family-loving husband to a man without home. And this desire made Mandela lead a life just like a monk. Monk, you know very well, a person who doesn't have home and who keeps moving for livelihood, and you can call it in Hindi what we call sannyasi, right? Now, I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Now, he is saying that I am not more virtuous and more self-sacrificing than the other man. Even the other men were also same as like him. They were also self-sacrificing and they were also virtuous. Means he was comparing himself with his people, that he was same to his people. He was not extraordinary, right? But he was not ready to accept that poor freedom which was allowed to them. He was not ready to be in the limited freedom. That's why he revolted. Now, freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. Now, Nelson Mandela is saying that freedom is indivisible. It cannot be divided. It is unsplittable. It cannot be broken into pieces, right? It cannot be given into pieces. It can be given as a whole. Nelson Mandela thought so. And then he told, the chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them, and the chains on all of them were the chains on Nelson Mandela's hands. Chains means, you know very well, chains, those irons on the hands and the legs. In Hindi, what we call bediya. Now, so he felt when any one of his community people was imprisoned, so he felt that he was imprisoned himself. Now, I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. Now, oppressor and oppressed. Now, who were oppressor here? White people were the oppressors. And who were oppressed people? The black people were the oppressed people. But Nelson Mandela is saying that both the people had to be freed. Both the people had to be made free. Why? Now, you might be thinking that only black people were the slaves, then why both the people, or why both kind of people had to be freed? Because Nelson Mandela thinks that white people were also slave. They were the slave of hatred. They were behind the bars of narrow-mindedness and prejudice. That's why they were also had to be freed from those bars of hatred and prejudice. And obviously the oppressed black people, they were to be freed from the prison of, or they were to be freed from the slavery of white people. A man who takes away another man's freedom is prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. As I told you, a man who is troubling others, that person is the prisoner of hatred, and he is behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Means prejudice and narrow-mindedness and hatred has occupied that person's mind who is troubling others. That means he has also to be freed from that those bars. Now, I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. I am not truly free. Now Nelson Mandela is saying that a person who is troubling others, who is making other people his slave, even that person is not free. Okay, so in the same way as the person whose freedom has been taken, in the same way this person is also a slave, and those are already slave. So both the persons have to be freed from their prisons, different prisons. One prison is of pride, one prison is of prejudice and narrow-mindedness, and another prison, the real actual prison of white people. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. Both the oppressed and the oppressor, both have been separated, or both have been robbed of their humanity. Both the people don't have humanity. Now oppressors don't have humanity because they are troubling the other people. If they had humanity, they would not have troubled those helpless people. And oppressed people don't have humanity because they are being treated just like animals and not like human beings. That's why both kind of persons, the oppressors and the oppressed, they don't possess humanity, right? So the chapter ends here. Thank you very much for listening.